Morning Year 7. So this morning we're starting our new unit, our new topic for this term, which is medieval realms. We're going to look very much at the social aspect of history this time. So rather than focusing on the kings, and the battles and who's in control, we're looking a lot more at ordinary life. All right. So if we'd been alive in the times of the medieval realms, would we have found it easy, to survive, or how difficult would our life have been compared to nowadays? So to go show you that, in picture format. This is effectively what we're going to be looking at. So we're starting off looking at villages. We're going to start looking at medieval villages today. We're going to look at how they're set up. We're going to look at what life would be like if you'd lived in one, the kind of jobs that you would have done, what kind of freedoms would you have had, your diet, all sorts of things. So we're going to try and have a good look at what a life would be like for a medieval villager, a medieval peasant. We're then going to have a look at towns and look at how medieval towns are different to the villages. What were the improvements, if you lived in a town, but also what were the disadvantages, because living in medieval towns, was not all it was cracked up to be. There was a lot of crime. They were incredibly unhygienic. They were also set out quite different to ours. So we'll have a look at how a medieval town was set up and how you'd be able to find your way around. We're then going to have a look at medieval religion. So what did people believe in that time period? Nowadays, if I ask people, even at Christmas time, and I know it's very difficult, because of COVID and restrictions, but who has been to a church or a mosque, even virtually, over this Christmas period, I would imagine the numbers are not very high. In that time period, people went to church every single week, not just once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week. It was a crime not to be religious in this time period. It was called being a heretic, if you weren't Catholic, if you weren't Christian. So we're going to have a look at what people did to try and show they were religious, to show how religious they were and to please their God. Then we're going to have a look at crime and punishment. So we're going to look at the kind of crimes that were committed in this time period and how they're different to what we've got nowadays. We'll have a look at how the punishments, were different to what we've got nowadays. But also we're going to try and work out why they had those particular punishments. There were reasons behind the punishments that they used. Were you likely to get justice in this time period? If somebody accused you of something and you didn't do it, without all of the forensics and the evidence we've got nowadays at your disposal, how could you prove that you hadn't committed a crime if somebody simply accused you of it? So people did get found guilty, on the word of somebody else, often, particularly in the aspects of things like witchcraft, which we'll look at a little bit later, doesn't quite come into the medieval topic. People were accused, on grudges, on falling out, and there was very little they could do to prove, that they were innocent. So we're going to look at crime and punishment. We're going to look at how you were found guilty, what did they do if they couldn't find out somebody was guilty or not. And then we'll do one lesson, looking at some of the aspects of torture and what was torture and how that was used, in the medieval times. Then finally, we'll look at medicine in this time period. So we'll look at if you were ill in this time period, are you likely to be cured by the help of doctors? Or actually, in some cases, did they make the situation an awful lot worse? We're going to focus in particularly, at the plague. So we're going to look at the Black Death, of 1349, but we're going to look at the plague returning in 1665. Not quite in the medieval times, but it's a good comparison to show us how their medical knowledge, has or has not improved in this time period. So that's the introduction. That's what we're going to be doing, for this topic. I'm now going to explain to you your first task for this lesson. So this lesson, your first task is we're going to look at what would be in a medieval village. What were medieval villages like? And just like nowadays, the first thing we'd look at, if we wanted to know what was in a village and how a village was set up, we'd look at maps. So we're going to do the same thing. You should online have a picture of 3 maps. They're PDFs, so they should be quite easy to print off. If not, you might have to use your phone or use the laptop you want to try and see them, as you're working. So I've given you 3 pictures, of maps. I've given you 3 for a reason. If we looked at just one picture of a map of a village, it's not necessarily going to be a typical picture, of what that would be like. If I showed you 2 pictures of medieval villages, one might be typical, one might not. How would we know which is the right one? Which is why I've given you 3. When you're trying to find evidence, in history, just like you would in science, for example, your minimum number, of sources you need to look at is 3. You need to have one effectively, as like a test case, to make sure that the other 2 you're looking at, are going to be the same. So you're going to look at your 3 pictures. And to find out what a village would definitely have in it and what a village would be like, you could do the following activity. And again, you've got a sheet which you can print off if you prefer, okay, or you can do this, okay, online. You can type it up and then print it off at a later date. I want you to think about those 3 pictures and find out what you would have in all 3 pictures, in just 2 pictures and in only 1 picture. So you're going to work your way through those maps and try and have a look and see what you can find. One of the maps has got a key next to it. I suggest you start with that picture and simply work your way down the key. All right, so I think the first one on the key is a church. So have a look at the other 2 pictures. Can you see a picture of a church in it? If you can, then it goes down in all 3 pictures. If it's only in 2, it goes in 2. If it's only in that 1 picture, then it goes, okay, in only 1 picture. Don't be too hung up about the wording that's used. So for example, if it's described as a forest in one and a wood in the other, all right, then effectively it's the same thing. If you've got a forest in one, a wood in the other, and a wooded area that's been drawn but not named, again, it still works as a wood. All right? A pond is the same whether it's a duck pond, a fish pond, okay, or looks like a puddle on the piece of paper. All right, so try to make sure you're not being too pernickety about the actual wording, otherwise you might end up with some of these in the wrong places. The only one I will mention that you won't realise it's the same thing is the manor house and a castle. All right, so if you remember back in our last unit, castles were built first. They weren't very pleasant. Okay, they weren't places where the Lord particularly wanted to live. So he then started building a manor house somewhere that is more comfortable. But in one of those pictures, you've got a castle, and and that would have been the same, okay, as a manor house. The castle in that particular village is where the Lord would have lived once the castles became more pleasant. Right, so I'm going to leave you, okay, to get on with that piece of work now, please. So just to go through the answers then of what you should have in all 3, 2 pictures and only 1 picture, and just to explain what some of these things are as well. Right, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly. If you can get a purple pen out, please, and if you can add to your answers, all right, the ones that I'm going through. So feel free to pause if I'm going through too fast. So in all 3 pictures, you should have the following. You should have a church, you should have a river or stream, whichever you decide to call it, a forest or a wood, a manor house / castle. You should have a mill, a pond, a meadow for hay, and fields in strips. All right, so do word it like that, field in strips, not stripes, no reading it. All right, this is basically how they divided up the land, and I'll talk about this further, okay, in a future lesson. All right, so that should be in all 3. In 2 pictures, you should have a pound, all right, spelled as in the money, pound. All right, this is where stray animals were taken. Nowadays in America, they still call the pound, okay, where they take stray dogs, all right, and this time period it would have been for all kind of animals, because obviously that was your livelihood, all right, your sheep, your pigs, your etc. You've got a tithe barn, spelled T-I-T-H-E. Right, a tithe barn is where you put your tithe, which was the name of the tax you paid to the church. So you had to give 10% of what you produced each year to the church. Obviously, for most villages, most peasants, okay, they hadn't got money, they couldn't pay the tax in money, so they paid it in goods. All right, so that's why you have a tithe barn in pretty much every single village. This is where you would take the goods that you have harvested and it would be stored, and that is what would then basically feed the church throughout the year, because obviously the church can't do their own farming because they've got their own jobs to do. So it worked for both sides. So it meant that the peasants could pay their tax in goods, and it meant that the church got the goods that they needed, okay, to keep them fed for the year. You had a stone cross. You had an ale house, which is basically a pub. You had a fowler's hut. Right, a fowler is somebody who hunts fowl birds, game birds. Okay, so we're talking things like partridge, we're talking things like duck, and they would catch these and then they would prepare them and sell them on, okay, as food. All right, so a lot of the surnames that we have nowadays, okay, so if you know anyone with the surname of Fowler, this is where it comes from. Okay, it comes from the job that they would have done. So F-O-W-L is the word, is the name for these kind of birds. So guinea fowl, for example, if you've heard of that, okay, that's where again the name would come from. You've then got a bailiff's house also in 2. A bailiff is somebody who would be generally employed by the Lord, and they would come round if you couldn't pay your taxes or you hadn't paid your taxes, all right, and they would take, okay, their pounds worth, all right, of flesh. Okay, what this means by pounds worth of flesh is if you hadn't got the money to pay it, and often these people didn't, then you would get a beating instead. All right, so that would be a bailiff, okay, designed, okay, to make sure people paid their taxes to the Lord and make an example of those who could not. In just one picture, okay, there were a few things if you look really, really hard, but the one I was particularly interested in you getting was a blacksmith. Okay, so on the one where you've got the castle, in the Bailey area, you'll notice it says B. Smith. Okay, so that is blacksmith. All right, so that's what you should have in all of those. All right, and once you've done that, your last activity, okay, for this lesson is to do this activity here. All right, so you're going to, as it says quickly on there, you're going to write down in a medieval village, all right, and then you've got two options, all right, of the answer to that question. So in a medieval in a medieval village, there were rich and poor people, or all the people were poor. So you've got to look at your table, all right, look at what you've found out and decide. All right, we know there's poor people in the village because it's got poor in both sentences. What you're looking for is any evidence, okay, of any rich people, even if it is just the one. All right, you've got to find evidence, okay, that there were some rich people in that village. All right, if they have, then you're going to put in a medieval village, there were rich and poor people. If you can't find any evidence of rich people, you put in a medieval village, all the people were poor. So you're going to write the whole sentence out. So in a medieval village, and you finish it off. You don't put A or B, you actually finish the whole sentence. What I then like is some evidence. All right, so in a medieval village, all right, let's say we're going to go for there were rich and poor people. I know this because I explain your evidence for how you know this. The second one, all right, so you'll start again, miss a line. In a medieval village, all people followed the Christian religion, or people were not religious. All right, so you decide which ending, okay, goes onto that sentence. And again, I want evidence. I know this because. And then finally, in a medieval village, most of the people were craftsmen, or most of the people were farmers. Again, choose the correct ending. All right, put the whole sentence together, and then give me, all right, some evidence, okay, for how you would know this. All right, so that's your task, okay, for this lesson.